He planted drugs, ripped her late mother's cherished pendant from her neck, sneering, "You're done, activist." This racist cop thought he could frame her, crush her fight against injustice. He was dangerously wrong. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was deep-cover DOJ, meticulously gathering proof. He had no idea the storm he'd unleashed or the devastating evidence she carried close to her heart. Get ready for the shocking revelation that brought a corrupt system to its knees. The Mississippi sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of County Road 7, shimmering heat waves rising like ghosts from the pavement. Inside the aging sedan, Detective Mara Whitlock, 38, felt a familiar prickle of sweat trace a path down her spine, a sensation entirely separate from the oppressive delta humidity. It was the sweat of calculated risk, of walking a tightrope woven from lies and half-truths over a chasm of institutional rot. Her eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian shards, flicked to the rearview mirror, then subtly down to the tiny lens nestled discreetly near her dashboard air vent. The dashcam was active, recording. It had to be. Outside, Officer Troy Riggs unfolded himself from his patrol car. He was a man built like a stack of bricks, wide, solid, seemingly immovable. His uniform strained across his thick chest and biceps, the fabric a stark white against his sun-reddened neck. Riggs moved with the unhurried swagger of a man who believed the ground beneath his feet belonged entirely to him, particularly this stretch of ground in this town of Riverbend, Mississippi. He had a reputation, carefully cultivated, for cleaning up the streets, a euphemism Mara knew translated to harassing, intimidating, and often fabricating charges against black residents and anyone else who didn't fit his narrow definition of acceptable. Mara watched him approach, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, knuckles white beneath her deep brown skin. She'd been pulled over for allegedly rolling through a stop sign miles back, a stop sign she knew with absolute certainty she had come to a complete halt at. This was the pretext. This was the beginning of the play Riggs didn't know she'd already written the ending to. He tapped on her window with a thick knuckle. Mara powered it down halfway, the humid air instantly thickening the atmosphere inside the car. "License and registration, ma'am," Riggs drawled, his voice a low rumble coated in faux politeness. His eyes, pale blue and unsettlingly vacant, roamed the interior of her car before settling on her face. There was a flicker of recognition, quickly masked. He knew her, not as Mara Whitlock, DOJ investigator operating under the deepest cover, but as Mara Whitlock, the sharp-tongued community lawyer who'd recently set up a pro bono practice downtown, asking too many questions, helping too many people file complaints. The activist. Mara handed over the documents, her movements deliberately slow and steady. "Keep calm. Observe. Document." These were the mantras drilled into her through years of navigating treacherous terrain, first in the bureau, now here. Riggs took the papers, barely glancing at them. His attention was fixed on her, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "You seem a little jumpy today, Ms. Whitlock. Got somewhere important to be." "Just heading home, officer," Mara replied, her voice even, betraying none of the cold fury simmering beneath the surface. He leaned closer, invading her space, his breath carrying the stale scent of coffee and chewing tobacco. "You know, we've been getting reports. Suspicious activity. Folks meeting at your little office, late hours." He paused, letting the insinuation hang in the heavy air. "Wouldn't want to think someone like you, trying to stir things up, was involved in anything illegal?" Mara met his gaze directly. "I run a legal aid office, Officer Riggs. We help people with their problems. Landlord disputes, wage claims, sometimes civil rights complaints." The smirk widened into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Civil rights," he scoffed. "Right?" He stepped back abruptly, turning towards his patrol car as if to run her license. But Mara knew better. Her eyes darted to her side mirror. She saw him pause by the rear passenger door of her sedan, his back momentarily to her. His hand dipped into the large pocket of his cargo pants, then quickly, almost casually reached towards her slightly ajar back window. It was a fractional movement, easily missed. But Mara didn't miss it. She saw the slight shift of his weight, the deliberate angle of his arm. He was planting it. The small baggie of white powder, the classic, crude setup. He sauntered back to her window, holding up her license. "Everything seems to be in order here, Ms. Whitlock. But standard procedure, gotta ask, you got anything in the car I should know about? Weapons? Drugs?" "No, officer. I do not." Her voice was ice. "Mind if I take a look?" It wasn't a question. "I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," Mara stated clearly, locking her eyes on the dashcam lens for a fraction of a second. Riggs chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Probable cause, ma'am. Smelled something suspicious when I approached the vehicle earlier. Like maybe marijuana." A blatant lie easily refutable but enough for him. He signaled to his own car, presumably for backup that wasn't coming. This was his solo performance. He opened her driver's side door. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Mara complied, moving with stiff precision. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear for herself, but with a cold, hard anger that threatened to crack her composure. This was the moment. The culmination of months of painstaking undercover work, documenting Riggs' pattern of abuse, his ties to local corruption. As she stood beside the car, Riggs reached inside, his movements exaggerated now, theatrical. He rummaged briefly near the back seat before triumphantly pulling out the small, clear baggie containing a nondescript white powder. He held it up, silhouetted against the blinding sun. Well, what do we have here?" His voice dripped with mock surprise. "Looks like your civil rights work involves a little something extra on the side." He turned to face her fully, the smirk now a leer of undisguised malice. "You're done, activist." Mara remained silent, her face an impassive mask. She catalogued his every move, every word, storing it away. The Dashcam was recording. Her own body cam, concealed beneath her blouse, was recording. But then Riggs did something unexpected, something personal, something that breached the wall of her professional detachment. His eyes fell on the delicate silver chain around her neck. On it hung a small, intricately carved wooden pendant shaped like a vev, a Haitian voda symbol. It had been her mother's, then her grandmother's, a tangible link to the legacy of strong women who had navigated far rougher waters than this. It smelled faintly of sandalwood and resilience. Before Mara could react, Riggs lunged forward. His thick fingers fumbled at the clasp, then ripped the chain from her neck. The delicate silver snapped. The pendant, her connection to her mother, to her past, flew through the air and landed with a soft thud in the muddy ditch beside the road. A gasp escaped Mara's lips, a raw, involuntary sound. The carefully constructed dam of her composure cracked. For a searing second, the investigator vanished, replaced by the daughter whose mother's memory had just been desecrated, tossed aside like trash. Riggs saw the flicker of pain, the momentary loss of control, and seized upon it. Resisting arrest, he barked, grabbing her arm in a bruising grip. Assaulting an officer, Mara didn't resist physically, but the fire in her eyes could have burned him. As he twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her face towards the dusty shoulder of the road, she saw him, a young black man, maybe college age, standing by an old pickup truck parked 50 yards away. He held his phone up, recording. Jamal Carter. She recognized him from a community meeting. Smart kid. Brave kid. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the shimmering heat. Riggs, focused on cuffing her, hadn't noticed him yet. Jamal. Mara's voice was a low, urgent whisper, barely audible over Riggs's grunts. Get this to Lena Park. The Clarion. Tell her. Tell her the river is rising. Riggs shoved her forward, forcing her head down. The rough metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists. The Mississippi sun beat down, merciless. But Mara Whitlock wasn't just an activist lawyer anymore. She was a federal investigator, and Troy Riggs had just walked, blind and arrogant, straight into the heart of her storm. He thought he was ending her fight. He had no idea he'd just ignited it. Chicago, 2005. The fluorescent lights of the precinct waiting room hummed a monotonous, indifferent tune. Rain lashed against the grimy windows, mirroring the storm inside 16-year-old Mara. She sat on a hard plastic chair, clutching a worn photograph of her father, Jean-Pierre Baptiste, his broad smile radiating a warmth that felt worlds away now. Hours earlier, he'd been picked up on his way home from his night shift as a hospital orderly. Mistaken identity, they'd said. A robbery suspect described only as a black man, medium build. It was a description that fit half the men in their Southside neighborhood. Jean-Pierre, a proud Haitian immigrant who preached resilience and the power of knowing one's own currents, had instilled in Mara a deep sense of justice, often quoting Haitian proverbs. He'd arrived in America with calloused hands and boundless hope, believing in the promise even when the reality fell short. He worked 2 jobs, saved meticulously, and taught Mara Creole songs and stories of the Loa, the spirits who guided and protected. His favorite saying, especially when faced with petty injustices or bureaucratic hurdles, was, "Ma vie, any luttes pas contre l'ondulation, luttes contre le fleuve." Little one, fight the river, not the ripple. Focus on the source, the system, the powerful current, not the fleeting disturbances on the surface. He should have been home hours ago. Mara's frantic calls had yielded bureaucratic runarounds until finally, a weary desk sergeant told her to come down to the station. She'd waited for 5 hours, her anxiety curdling into a cold dread. Finally, a detective with tired eyes and slumped shoulders emerged. He didn't meet her gaze. There had been an altercation, he mumbled. Mr. Baptiste had become agitated in the holding cell. Resisted officers. An ambulance had been called. He didn't make it. Acute asthma attack exacerbated by stress. Mara knew her father carried an inhaler, but he hadn't had a serious attack in years. Resisted officers. The phrase hung in the air, cold and sharp. She knew her father. He was respectful, wary of authority, acutely aware of the precariousness of being a black immigrant in a city rife with tension. He wouldn't have resisted. Later, whispers would reach her, talk of excessive force, of pleas for his inhaler ignored, of casual brutality in a concrete box hidden from public view. But officially, an unfortunate medical incident. Case closed. The river had swallowed him whole. That night, the trajectory of Mara's life shifted irrevocably. The grief was an ocean, vast and crushing, but beneath it flowed a new current. Rage. A cold, focused rage directed not just at the officers involved, but at the indifferent system that allowed it, excused it, perpetuated it. Her father's last words, relayed second-hand by a sympathetic paramedic, "Tell Mara, fight the river," became her compass. She devoured books on law, on civil rights, on criminology. She excelled, driven by a purpose that burned hotter than any adolescent rebellion. She would fight the river. She would understand its currents, its depths, its hidden dangers. She would dismantle it from the inside. The FBI seemed like the logical place, the top of the food chain, the agency with the power to investigate the very systems that had failed her father. Joining the bureau was its own kind of battle. She was often the only black woman in the room, her presence a visible challenge to the established order. She faced the insidious 1-2 punch of sexism and racism daily. Her insights were dismissed as emotional, her ambition viewed with suspicion. When she started flagging patterns of misconduct in local police departments during joint task forces, excessive force complaints disproportionately targeting minorities, suspicious evidence handling, officers with histories shielded by the blue wall of silence, her reports were often buried, deemed inconclusive, or, worse, attributed to her having a chip on her shoulder. One supervisor, a man whose condescension was as predictable as the sunrise, had smirked during a review, "Whitlock, maybe you're just seeing ghosts. Looking for problems where there aren't any. Being a little hysterical." Hysterical. The word was a dismissal, a silencing tactic she'd heard levied against women challenging power structures countless times. But Mara wasn't hysterical. She was meticulous. She gathered data, connected dots, built cases brick by painstaking brick. She saw the river's hidden currents, the undertow of corruption pulling communities down. Her breaking point came after years of pushing against the internal tide. She compiled an extensive dossier on a network of corrupt officers in a major Midwestern city, complete with financial trails and witness testimonies. It was airtight. Her direct superior sat on it for months. Then, key evidence mysteriously disappeared from the files. When Mara confronted him, he threatened her career. Feeling she had no other choice, she carefully leaked redacted portions of the dossier to a trusted journalist. The resulting exposé rocked the city, leading to indictments and reforms. But the Bureau's internal investigation quickly traced the leak back to Mara. She wasn't fired outright, that would look too much like retaliation. Instead, she was reassigned to a bureaucratic backwater, stripped of meaningful casework, effectively ending her career as an investigator. The message was clear: the river protects its own. Disillusioned but not defeated, Mara left the FBI. She couldn't fight the river from within its banks if they kept reinforcing the levees against her. She needed a different approach. She went back to school, earned her law degree, and focused on community lawyering, representing the very people often targeted by the systems she once tried to police. Mississippi drew her in. The Deep South, the historical heartland of the struggle for civil rights, felt like ground zero. Riverbend, a town simmering with racial tension and plagued by rumors of police misconduct under the iron fist of officers like Troy Riggs, seemed like the place her father's last words had unknowingly pointed her towards. It was a microcosm of the larger river she was determined to fight. She arrived not as Mara Baptiste, daughter of Jean-Pierre, but as Mara Whitlock, using her mother's maiden name. She established her small legal aid office, slowly gaining the trust of the community. And she began gathering evidence, meticulously documenting the ripples of injustice, illegal stops, planted evidence, excessive force, knowing they all flowed from the same source. Her past FBI training gave her an edge in evidence collection and analysis. She reached out to old, trusted contacts within the Department of Justice, presenting her preliminary findings. They were cautious, burned by past failures, but the patterns she illuminated were undeniable. They agreed to quietly sanction a deep undercover civil rights probe, with Mara as the linchpin. If she could gather irrefutable evidence of systemic corruption and constitutional violations within the Riverbend PD, the DOJ would bring the full weight of federal power down. Now, she had a daughter of her own, 12-year-old Mara. Named in honor of Mara's mother, she was bright, observant, and possessed a quiet strength that reminded Mara intensely of Jean-Pierre. Raising Mara alone, balancing the demands of her undercover work with the fierce, protective love of a mother was Mara's most challenging tightrope walk. Mara knew her mother was a lawyer helping people. She didn't know the full extent of the danger, the depth of the deception. Unbeknownst to Mara, Mara held a crucial piece of the puzzle. Worried about her mother's long hours and the tense atmosphere she sometimes sensed, Mara had started keeping a journal. But it wasn't just a diary of feelings. Influenced by her mother's analytical mind and her grandfather's stories of coded communication used during the Haitian Revolution, Mara had developed her own shorthand. She meticulously logged the times her mother mentioned Officer Riggs, the descriptions of cars Mara pointed out as having been recently stopped, the license plate numbers she overheard Mara repeating into her phone. She noted patterns, times of day, locations, all disguised within anecdotes about school, friends, and drawings. It was a child's attempt to make sense of her world, unknowingly creating a detailed ledger of Troy Riggs's predatory patrols, a hidden truth waiting for its moment. The pendant Riggs had ripped from her neck wasn't just a symbol of heritage, it was a vulnerability deliberately exposed. But the real legacy, the true weapon, was the quiet, persistent gathering of truth passed down through generations, from Jean-Pierre's wisdom to Mara's investigation to Mara's coded journal. The undertow of the past fueled the fight against the present river. The video hit the internet like a lightning strike on dry tinder. Jamal Carter, heart-pounding, had driven straight to Memphis, bypassing local news outlets he suspected were too close to the Riverbend establishment. He found the Clarion newsroom a chaotic symphony of ringing phones, clattering keyboards, and urgent voices. He asked for Lena Park. Lena, a Korean-American reporter whose relentless pursuit of truth had earned her a Pulitzer nomination the previous year, watched Jamal's footage on her monitor, her expression hardening with each second. The shaky cell phone video was raw, visceral. It showed Riggs planting the drugs, his sneering face, the casual brutality as he ripped the pendant from Mara's neck, Mara's desperate, whispered instruction. It was damning. He whispered your name, Jamal said, still breathless. And the Clarion said, "The river is rising." Lena's sharp eyes met Jamal's. A coded message. She didn't know Mara Whitlock personally, but she knew her reputation, the tenacious lawyer challenging the status quo in Riverbend. This wasn't just a dirty cop framing an activist, this felt bigger. She uploaded the video to the Clarion's website and social media channels with the headline, "Caught on Camera. Riverbend Officer Appears to Plant Drugs, Assault Lawyer During Traffic Stop." The flood began. Within hours, the video exploded. Shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands. Local news picked it up, then regional, then national cable networks. Hashtag Justice for Mara Whitlock trended. Riverbend, Mississippi, a town most Americans couldn't place on a map, was suddenly under a harsh, unforgiving spotlight. The reaction in Riverbend itself was immediate and polarized. The town's black community, long simmering under the weight of Riggs's and others' oppressive policing, saw the video as confirmation of what they'd always known. Reverend Elijah Hayes, a towering figure with a voice like rolling thunder and the unwavering steel of an ex-Marine in his spine, called for an emergency community meeting at his church, the First Baptist Church of Riverbend. "We have seen the evidence with our own eyes." Hayes roared from the pulpit that Sunday, the church packed to overflowing, the air thick with righteous anger and desperate hope. "We have seen the rot that festers in the heart of our town's protectors. How long? How long will we suffer this indignity? How long will we allow the river of injustice to flood our homes, drown our children's futures?" Alongside him stood Rosa Morales, a quiet but fierce organizer for the rights of undocumented workers in the region. Many in her community were terrified of any interaction with law enforcement, making them easy targets for exploitation and abuse. Though undocumented herself, Rosa spoke with clarity and courage. "This isn't just about one officer or one victim," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "This is about a system that preys on the vulnerable. They target Ms. Whitlock because she speaks truth to power. They target our community because they think we have no voice. Today, we show them they are wrong." Protests erupted. Peaceful marches snaked through Riverbend's small downtown, demanding Riggs's immediate suspension and a full investigation. Chants of "no justice, no peace" echoed off the old brick buildings. The town's white establishment largely circled the wagons, muttering about outside agitators and respect for law enforcement. But the cracks were showing. Inside the Riverbend Police Department, the atmosphere was toxic. Riggs, initially defiant, grew increasingly isolated as the pressure mounted. His partner, Officer Gina Torres, was caught in an agonizing bind. A Latina single mother, she'd witnessed Riggs's casual racism and corner-cutting for years, biting her tongue, telling herself she needed the job, the health insurance, the stability for her son. She knew Riggs was dirty, had suspected worse, but fear kept her silent. The video terrified her, not just for Riggs, but for herself, for being associated with him. Lena Park, relentless, dug deeper. Anonymous tips started coming in. One led her to Gina Torres. Lena approached her cautiously, appealing not to her duty as an officer, but to her conscience as a woman, a mother. Gina initially stonewalled, terrified of Riggs's retribution. He knew about the bitter custody battle she was fighting with her ex-husband and had subtly threatened to interfere. But Lena's persistence, coupled with the mounting public outcry and the image of Mara being manhandled, chipped away at her defenses. Late one night, Gina forwarded Lena a string of text messages from Riggs sent just days before Mara's arrest. They were ugly, filled with racial slurs and resentment. One stood out: "Gotta shut that Whitlock woman down. Think I know how." Just another angry black bitch stirring up trouble where it ain't wanted. Lena published the texts. The floodwaters rose higher. The mayor convened an emergency town hall meeting in the high school gymnasium. It was packed, tense, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The police chief, a man nearing retirement who preferred platitudes to action, offered vague promises of an internal review. Riggs, placed on administrative leave but not yet fired, sat stony-faced near the stage, flanked by police union representatives. Then, a figure walked towards the microphone set up for public comment. It was Mara Whitlock. Small for her 12 years, she stood straight and tall, her eyes fixed on Riggs. Mara, released on bail pending charges thanks to the video evidence and swift intervention from lawyers mobilized by the DOJ, sat in the audience, her heart aching with a mixture of pride and terror for her daughter. Mara's voice, though quiet, carried through the hushed gymnasium. "My name is Mara Whitlock. My mom is Mara Whitlock." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Officer Riggs and everyone who believes him, my mom is not a criminal. She helps people. She believes in justice." Her gaze swept across the room, then landed squarely back on Riggs. "She taught me that telling the truth is the most important thing, even when it's hard. Even when you're scared." Her voice gained strength. "Planting drugs on someone? Lying about them? Hurting them? That's criminal. My mom's not the criminal here. You are." A stunned silence hung in the air for a beat, then the gymnasium erupted. Applause, shouts of support, tears. Reverend Hayes stood, clapping slowly, deliberately. Rosa Morales pumped her fist in the air. It was a turning point, the innocence and righteous anger of a child cutting through the obfuscation and denial. Riggs flushed crimson, staring straight ahead. But across the gym, another phone screen lit up. Cody Riggs, Troy's 15-year-old son, a quiet kid often seen trying to shrink away from his father's boisterous presence, looked down at his phone, then quickly typed a message. Mara felt her own phone vibrate in her pocket. She pulled it out later, away from the noise. A text from an unknown number: "I saw the video. What my dad did, it was wrong. I'm sorry. Cody R." The flood of public opinion had breached the walls, reaching even into the heart of Riggs's own family. The river was indeed rising, threatening to wash away the foundations of lies and corruption that had held Riverbend captive for too long. Lena Park knew the story was far from over. The real battle, the legal one, was just beginning. The air in the federal courthouse in Jackson crackled with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the charged atmosphere. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. The DOJ's civil rights lawsuit against the Riverbend Police Department, seeking a consent decree to force sweeping reforms, hinged on this moment. And at the center of it all was Mara Whitlock, no longer posing as a humble community lawyer, but revealed in court documents as the lead undercover investigator for the Department of Justice. The revelation had sent shockwaves through Riverbend. Riggs and his defense team, initially confident they could discredit Mara as a biased activist with a vendetta, were now scrambling. Facing a seasoned federal agent was a different game entirely. Mara took the stand, calm and composed. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, her hair pulled back severely, she projected an aura of quiet authority. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chin, a precise and methodical lawyer, guided her through her testimony. Ms. Whitlock, Chin began, please describe the scope and findings of your undercover investigation into the Riverbend Police Department. Mara detailed months of painstaking work, observing patrols, documenting unconstitutional stops, collecting testimony from victims too afraid to come forward publicly. Then came the bombshell data. Utilizing satellite-based vehicle tracking data cross-referenced with dispatch logs and Officer Riggs's own activity reports he frequently falsified, we identified a clear pattern, Mara stated, her voice steady. Over a 6-month period, Officer Riggs initiated 112 traffic stops. Of those, 89, nearly 80%, involved black drivers. In a town where black residents make up approximately 45% of the population, she presented charts, graphs, maps, stark, irrefutable evidence of racial profiling on a massive scale. The data showed Riggs concentrating his patrols in predominantly black neighborhoods, pulling people over for minor or non-existent infractions, often escalating the encounters. On cross-examination, Riggs's lead attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Marcus Thorne, went on the attack. Ms. Whitlock, isn't it true you have a personal history that might color your perception of law enforcement? A deep-seated animosity stemming from the unfortunate death of your father in Chicago police custody years ago. Mara met his gaze without flinching. My father's death informed my commitment to justice, Mr. Thorne. It did not compromise my ability to gather objective evidence. The data speaks for itself. Objective evidence? Thorne scoffed. Or a carefully constructed narrative to fulfill a predetermined conclusion. A vendetta against an officer you perceived as racist, pursued with the backing of federal power. He leaned towards the jury box. Isn't this simply about revenge? Objection. Chin snapped. Counsel is badgering the witness and speculating. Sustained. Judge Anita Desai ruled, her voice calm but firm. Judge Desai, a highly respected jurist known for her sharp intellect and fair-mindedness, watched the proceedings intently, her dark eyes missing nothing. An Indian-American woman who had navigated her own path through prejudice. She understood the nuances of power and bias. Thorne shifted tactics, trying to paint Riggs as a dedicated officer unfairly targeted. But Lena Park, seated in the press gallery, had another piece of evidence ready. Working with Chen's team, she had authenticated a voicemail message left on the phone of a town councilman known to be sympathetic to Riggs. At the appropriate moment, Chen requested permission to play it. Riggs's voice, slurred and angry, filled the courtroom. Tell the mayor he needs to shut this whole thing down. Mississippi don't need feds sniffing around, and we damn sure don't need uppity Negroes like that Whitlock woman telling us how to run our town. We handle our own problems here. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The raw, undisguised racism hung heavy in the air. Riggs's face turned a mottled purple. The next blow came from an unexpected source. Called by the prosecution, Officer Gina Torres took the stand, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. Chin gently questioned her about the pressures within the department, about Riggs's behavior. Officer Torres, Chin asked softly, why did you remain silent about Officer Riggs's conduct for so long? Gina looked towards Riggs, then quickly away, tears welling in her eyes. I was scared, she whispered. He knew I was fighting for custody of my son. He implied he could make things difficult for me. Use his connections. I couldn't risk losing my boy. Her voice broke. But what he did to Ms. Whitlock, the things he said, it was wrong. I couldn't live with it anymore. She confessed to witnessing Riggs falsify reports, to hearing him boast about harassing black drivers, to knowing about the planted drugs. Her testimony corroborated Mara's findings from the inside. Thorne's cross-examination was brutal, attacking her credibility, implying she was making a deal to save herself. But Gina held firm, her quiet conviction more powerful than Thorne's bluster. The final, decisive piece of evidence came, fittingly, from the object that had triggered the public firestorm, the pendant. Jamal Carter, celebrated as a local hero, had meticulously searched the muddy ditch where Riggs had thrown it. Guided by Mara's description after her release, he found it partially submerged but intact. He turned it over to Lena, who passed it to the DOJ investigators. Chan approached the witness stand, holding up the small, carved wooden pendant in a clear evidence bag. Ms. Whitlock, You testified that Officer Riggs ripped this pendant from your neck during the arrest. Yes, Mara confirmed. And this pendant has significant personal value to you, correct? A family heirloom? Yes. It belonged to my mother and grandmother. Chun paused, letting the significance sink in. But it held another kind of value as well, didn't it, Ms. Whitlock? A value Officer Riggs could never have imagined. He turned to Judge Desai. Your Honor, forensic analysis of this pendant revealed something hidden within a tiny, almost invisible compartment. He presented the forensic report. Embedded deep within the wood, shielded from casual view, was a high-capacity micro-SD card. And what was on this card, Ms. Whitlock? Chen asked. Mara looked directly at Riggs, whose face had gone ashen. Contingency, she stated simply. Given the risks of the investigation, I needed a secure, undetectable way to store sensitive backup data. The pendant contained encrypted audio files and financial records. Specifically, recordings of Officer Riggs soliciting and accepting bribes from individuals connected to a local drug distribution ring, the very dealers he was supposed to be arresting, but was instead protecting in exchange for cash and information he used against rivals or innocent citizens. The courtroom descended into chaos. Riggs lunged forward, shouting incoherently before being restrained by marshals. Thorne looked utterly poleaxed. The pendant, symbol of Mara's heritage, her vulnerability, had become the ultimate weapon. It wasn't just about civil rights violations anymore, it was about deep-seated criminal corruption. Days later, Judge Desai delivered her ruling. Citing the overwhelming evidence, the satellite data, the racist voicemail, Gina Torres's corroboration, and the explosive revelations from the micro-SD card, she found a pervasive pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing and corruption within the Riverbend Police Department. Her remedy was drastic and unprecedented for a town of Riverbend's size. She ordered the dissolution of the current police department to be rebuilt from the ground up under federal oversight, starting with new leadership, mandatory body cams for all officers, implicit bias training, and robust community accountability measures. The river of injustice had been dammed, its toxic flow interrupted. The revelation was complete. The transformation of the old Riverbend Police Department building was both literal and symbolic. The bars on the windows came down, replaced by wide panes of glass that let sunlight flood into freshly painted rooms. The grim interrogation rooms became counseling spaces, the holding cells converted into a small computer lab. Where the imposing chief's office once stood, there was now a bright, open area filled with beanbag chairs and bookshelves. The building, once a symbol of fear and oppression for many in Riverbend, was being reborn as the Jean-Pierre Baptiste Community Youth Center. Mara Whitlock stood near the entrance, watching her daughter, Amara, now 13, confidently direct a group of teenage volunteers arranging donated books. A sense of fragile hope settled over Mara, a feeling as warm and welcome as the Mississippi sun on this clear autumn day. The legal battles were mostly over. The DOJ consent decree was in place. The fight had been won, but the work of healing, of rebuilding trust, was just beginning. Across the newly sodded lawn, a different kind of work was underway. Troy Riggs, stripped of his badge, convicted on federal corruption charges but offered a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against the drug ring figures, was serving his community service hours. Under the watchful, uncompromising gaze of Reverend Elijah Hayes, Riggs was part of a crew cleaning up the overgrown grounds around the center, his movements stiff, awkward, stripped of their former swagger. He wielded a shovel, digging trenches for new flower beds, his face grim, head bowed. There was no smirk now, only the dull resignation of a man whose world had crumbled around him. The new Riverbend police chief stood beside Mara, surveying the scene. Gina Torres, her expression a mixture of determination and weariness, had accepted the challenging role after a lengthy, transparent search process overseen by the DOJ and a community advisory board. She was implementing the mandated reforms, body cams were already standard issue, bias training was ongoing, and community dialogue sessions were held weekly. It was an uphill battle, rebuilding trust brick by brick, but Gina felt a profound sense of responsibility, a need to atone for her past silence by ensuring a different future. It's a start, Gina said quietly, nodding towards Riggs. Accountability looks different for everyone. Mara nodded. Justice isn't always about punishment, Gina. Sometimes it's about restoration. Rebuilding what was broken. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the youth center was a town event unlike any Riverbend had seen before. Black, white, Hispanic residents mingled, sharing lemonade and cookies under the afternoon sun. There was a palpable sense of cautious optimism, a shared understanding that something fundamental had shifted. Reverend Hayes offered a booming prayer of dedication. Rosa Morales spoke about the center being a safe haven for all youth regardless of background or status. Lena Park was there, notepad in hand, documenting not just the end of one story but the beginning of another. Jamal Carter, now enrolled in journalism school, filmed the event for a class project. The final speaker was Mara. She stood at the portable lectern holding a small, leather-bound journal. Not her own coded diary, but her grandfather's. Mara had given it to her recently, filled with Jean-Pierre Baptiste's thoughts, his struggles, his hopes, written in a mixture of Creole and English. Mara found the page she was looking for. My grandfather, Jean-Pierre Baptiste, who this center is named after, wrote this shortly after he came to America. She announced, her voice clear and strong. She read, "They talk of this land like a promised sea, a destination. But arriving is not the end. You find the river still flows strong here, same as back home, just with different banks. Carries history, power, danger. A river drowns the unprepared, the arrogant who think they can command it. But it guides the wise, the patient, the ones who learn its currents, towards the true sea, the sea of possibility." She looked up, her eyes finding her mother's in the crowd. My mom learned the currents. She didn't try to stop the river, she navigated it. She fought for the river, for its potential to flow towards justice. Applause rippled through the crowd. As people began to mingle afterwards, Troy Riggs, finished with his duties for the day, hesitantly approached Mara. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes downcast, hands twisting the handle of the shovel he still held. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken history. "Whitlock. Ms. Whitlock," he finally mumbled, the name catching in his throat. Reverend Hayes said I should." He trailed off, unable to articulate the apology, the remorse, perhaps even the shame warring within him. Mara looked at him, not with hatred, but with a profound weariness and a flicker of something else, not forgiveness, perhaps, but recognition of a shared, broken humanity. She remembered her father's words, "Fight the river, not the ripple." Riggs was a ripple, a destructive one, but the river was the system that shaped him, empowered him, and ultimately consumed him. The river was what needed changing. She didn't offer absolution. She didn't offer condemnation. Instead, she gestured towards a patch of hard, unbroken ground near the building's foundation where more flower beds were planned. "Start digging," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Riggs looked at the ground, then back at her, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He nodded curtly, turned, and walked towards the designated spot. He lifted the shovel, hesitated for a moment, then plunged it into the earth. The work was hard. The soil was resistant. But it was a beginning. Mara watched him for a moment, then turned back towards the bustling community center, towards her daughter, towards the future they were all trying to build. The river of Riverbend was still flowing, but its course was being altered, slowly, painstakingly. Justice flows not from the mighty, but from the stubborn drops that carve canyons. Thank you for watching. We hope Mara's powerful story of resilience resonated with you. Want more content that shines a light on justice? Please like, share this video to spread awareness, and subscribe so you never miss an update from our community.